Have you ever heard of a woman whose name became synonymous with manipulation and malice? A queen who challenged traditions, confronted prophets, and changed the course of an entire nation's religious history? Today we're going to uncover the real story of Jezebel, not just the controversial aspects everyone knows, but the complex political and religious narrative behind one of the most misunderstood figures in the Old Testament. If you want to understand how religious and political conflicts shaped ancient history, hit that like button now and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming content about fascinating historical figures. Get ready for a journey through the corridors of power in ancient Israel, where love, politics, religion, and power intertwine in surprising ways. To understand Jezebel, we first need to comprehend the world in which she lived. We're talking about the 9th century before Christ, a time when ancient Israel was divided into two kingdoms. The northern kingdom, called Israel, and the southern kingdom, known as Judah. Jezebel wasn't an Israelite. She was born in Sidon, a prosperous Phoenician city located in what we now know as Lebanon. The Phoenicians were known as the great navigators and traders of antiquity. They were the ones who dominated maritime commerce in the Mediterranean. As the daughter of the king of Sidon, Jezebel grew up surrounded by luxury and power, also in a culture completely different from that of the Israelites. While the Israelites worshiped Jehovah as the one true God, the Phoenicians had a diverse pantheon, with Baal being one of their principal deities. The very name Jezebel carries religious significance. Many scholars believe it could be translated as Baal exalts or Baal's husband, a clear reference to the Phoenician god she would venerate throughout her life. Jezebel was described as a woman of strong personality, determined and strategically intelligent. She wasn't just a decorative figure in the palace. She was a true political leader who knew how to exercise influence and power. The marriage between Jezebel and King Ahab of Israel wasn't a fairy tale romance. It was a carefully calculated political alliance between two nations that needed to strengthen their geopolitical positions in the region. From Israel's side, King Ahab sought economic stability and military protection. The Phoenicians controlled crucial trade routes and possessed a powerful naval fleet. From the Phoenician side, an alliance with Israel guaranteed access to overland routes and inland markets. When Jezebel arrived in the Israelite capital, she didn't come alone. She brought with her an entourage that included priests, prophets, and an entire religious structure dedicated to the worship of Baal and Asherah, another Phoenician deity. Imagine the cultural impact. A foreign princess, with her own gods, her own traditions, her own religious practices, arriving to become queen of a people who consider themselves chosen by one god. Jezebel quickly demonstrated that she wouldn't be a passive queen. She exercised considerable influence over Ahab, not only in domestic matters, but also in state policies and, most importantly, in religious matters. Under her influence, Ahab began to allow and even promote the worship of Baal in Israel. Temples were built, priests were financed with state resources, and gradually, a foreign religion began to compete with traditional Israelite faith. Jezebel's strategy for introducing Baal worship in Israel was sophisticated and gradual. She didn't try to completely replace the Israelite religion all at once. Instead, she presented Baal as an attractive alternative. Baal was seen as the god of fertility, rain, and agricultural prosperity. In an agrarian society like Israel, these promises were extremely seductive, especially during periods of drought or economic hardship. But Jezebel's influence wasn't limited to promoting her own religion. She also initiated a systematic persecution of Jehovah's prophets who opposed the religious changes. According to biblical accounts, Jezebel ordered the death of numerous Israelite prophets, eliminating voices that rose against the introduction of foreign cults. This persecution created a climate of fear among traditional religious leaders. It was in this context that the figure of the prophet Elijah emerged. Concerned about the religious division that was fragmenting Israel, Elijah decided to directly confront Jezebel's influence and her priests. Elijah represented resistance to religious change. He was the voice crying out for preservation of traditional Israelite faith against what he saw as contamination by foreign influences. The confrontation culminated in the famous episode at Mount Carmel. Elijah challenged Baal's prophets to a spiritual competition that would determine which deity was truly powerful. The challenge was simple in conception but profound in its implications. Each side would prepare a sacrifice, and the god who answered with fire would be recognized as a true god. Baal's prophets prepared their altar, prayed fervently, danced, and cried out for hours, but there was no response. When Elijah's turn came, he not only prepared his altar, but soaked it with water, making the challenge even more difficult. When Elijah called upon Jehovah, fire came down from heaven and completely consumed the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and even the water around it. It was a dramatic demonstration of power that deeply impressed all those present. The victory at Mount Carmel triggered a violent reaction from Elijah. Taken by religious fervor, he ordered the capture and execution of all the Baal prophets present. More than 800 men were killed that day. This extreme response demonstrates the intensity of the religious conflict of the time. For Elijah, this wasn't just a theological dispute, but a spiritual war for the soul of Israel. When Jezebel learned of the massacre of her priests, her reaction was immediate and furious. She sent a direct message to Elijah, swearing by her gods that he would be dead within 24 hours. This threat revealed both Jezebel's determination and her ability to inspire fear even in a prophet who had just demonstrated his God's power. Surprisingly, Elijah fled. The man who had faced 800 prophets and seen fire come down from heaven was overcome by fear at the threat of one woman. He fled to the desert, where he experienced a profound spiritual crisis. This flight reveals the psychological complexity of biblical characters. Even great heroes of faith had moments of doubt and human weakness. Another episode that demonstrates Jezebel's controlling character was the case of Naboth's vineyard. King Ahab desired a vineyard located near the royal palace, but its owner, Naboth, refused to sell it because it was a family inheritance. When Ahab returned discouraged to the palace, Jezebel took the initiative. She organized an elaborate conspiracy. They bribed false witnesses to accuse Naboth of blasphemy, a crime punishable by death. Naboth was executed based on false accusations, and Ahab finally obtained the vineyard he desired. But this victory would come at a high price. When Elijah learned of Naboth's murder, he received prophetic message he was to deliver to King Ahab. The prophecy was grim. Both Ahab and Jezebel would pay with their lives for their crimes. Specifically about Jezebel, Elijah prophesied that she would die violently and that her body would be devoured by dogs by the wall of Jezreel, a humiliating death for a queen. The first part of the prophecy was fulfilled when Ahab died in battle against the Syrians. He was struck by an arrow shot at random, what biblical writers saw as the hand of divine providence. With Ahab's death, Jezebel lost her main source of political power, but continued to exercise influence as queen mother during her son's reigns. The final fulfillment of the prophecy came through Jehu, a military commander who led a coup against Ahab's dynasty. When Jehu arrived in Jezreel, Jezebel was waiting for him. In a gesture that demonstrated her determination to maintain royal dignity to the end, Jezebel prepared herself carefully. She combed her hair, applied eye makeup, and dressed in her finest clothes before appearing at the palace window. By Jehu's command, palace officials threw Jezebel from the window. She died instantly, and her body was left in the street where it was partially devoured by dogs, fulfilling exactly Elijah's prophecy. The story of Jezebel presents us with complex questions about power, religion, and female leadership in the ancient world. On one hand, she is portrayed as a manipulative woman who corrupted Israel's faith. On the other, she can be seen as a strong leader who defended her religious and cultural convictions. From a historical perspective, Jezebel's story illustrates the challenges faced by multicultural and multi-religious societies. The conflict between her and Elijah represents the tension between cultural openness and preservation of traditional identity. Today, we can see in Jezebel's story echoes of contemporary conflicts between different value systems, immigration, and religious diversity issues, and the challenges of maintaining social cohesion in pluralistic societies. Regardless of our religious perspective, Jezebel's story remains relevant because it explores universal themes: the exercise of power, the limits of religious tolerance, the consequences of political decisions, and the complexity of human nature. The story of Jezebel is much more than the account of an evil queen. It's a complex narrative about cultural clash, religious conflict, and the consequences of power misused. It reminds us that history is rarely simple, that even seemingly one-dimensional figures carry complexities that deserve our careful analysis. If you found this analysis interesting, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more content about fascinating historical figures. Leave in the comments, what did you think of Jezebel's story? Was she a villain or a victim of the circumstances of her time? Thank you for watching, and until the next video, where we'll continue exploring the most intriguing stories of antiquity. God bless.